My name is Ava Collins, and I thought I knew the man I married. I built a career, a home, a life rooted in trust, until the morning I discovered my husband had quietly plotted to drain my accounts, destroy my reputation, and leave me with nothing. What began as a loving marriage unraveled into a hidden war of deceit, betrayal, and calculated manipulation. But what he underestimated was my ability to read numbers, patterns, and people, and I refused to break. Where are you watching from? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of this story. I'm 36 years old, living and working in San Francisco as the chief financial officer of a large healthcare conglomerate. On paper, I'm exactly what people expect: steady, successful, married to a man who smiles easily at charity galas and company dinners. What they didn't know was that one ordinary morning would unravel everything I thought I had. I had just poured my coffee when Marcus, my husband, pushed a neat stack of papers across the kitchen table and said, casual as sunrise, "It's just a formality. You don't need to read every line. Sign it." At the same moment, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You don't know what's happening yet, right? Don't let him make the first move." My hands went icy cold, not from Marcus's words, but from the sick certainty that I'd just stepped into a plan laid down long before that cup of coffee. If the person who shares your bed suddenly looks at you like a prize to be cut apart, what would you do? Comment if you've ever had that hollow gut feeling something was wrong. Hit like if you believe people should be able to protect themselves. And before I go on, don't forget to subscribe. I'll tell you how I exposed Marcus and turned his con into the final blow that cost him everything. The story began that same morning. I sat at my laptop for hours, staring at the small numbers flickering on a secondary account screen. The one I used to stash portions of bonuses, a private safety net. Over months, there'd been a pattern. $500 here, $1,200 there, sometimes $750, then $2,000. Not sums to make a headline, but enough to suggest a practiced hand siphoning away little by little. I'm not someone who forgets figures. I make them live on ledgers. I track entries the way some people track birthdays. So when money disappeared and I couldn't account for it, I knew someone was testing the water. Marcus came into the kitchen with his own steaming mug, smiling in a way that felt practiced. "You're up early?" he said. "What are you looking at?" I clicked the laptop shut, voice even, just glancing over some spreadsheets for work. He sat across from me, his dark eyes warm in a way that suddenly felt too focused. "We should consolidate everything," he said. "You have too many accounts. If anything happens later, it'll be messy. Better to have it in one place." For 10 years of marriage, Marcus had never once cared about my personal accounts. We'd kept a joint account for shared expenses and maintained our separate financial lives out of simple respect. Now he was suggesting consolidation, as if it were a kindness. My chest tightened. It read like a line from a script rehearsed long ago. A memory surfaced from 6 months earlier. Marcus at our dinner table, announcing he was quitting his job. "I'm exhausted. Ava, I can't handle the pressure anymore. I need a break." I remember the dull thud in my chest when I heard it. "You've seemed fine," I said. He shrugged. "I'm burnt out. Give me a few months, and I'll get my edge back." Love, duty, I let it slide. I agreed. "Okay, I'll manage things. We can afford it. Just rest." From that day forward, the weight of our finances settled onto my shoulders. I never complained. I thought that's what marriage meant. But the withdrawals in my secondary account, plus the sudden interest Marcus showed in my finances, made everything fall into place like a map I hadn't known I was following. I started watching him. Marcus began taking more meetings with friends, always vague about names, always stepping into conversations or glancing at texts with a defensiveness that felt practiced. Once, standing outside the room, I heard him on the phone. "Don't worry. She doesn't suspect. A few more weeks." My blood turned to ice. He was talking about me. When he realized I was there, he clipped the call and turned to me with a smile. Just hashing out something with an old friend. My mouth felt full of gravel. Pieces were clicking into place. I wasn't the protagonist of a domestic bliss story. I was the target of a carefully engineered trap. I downloaded 3 months of statements and watched more than 30 small transactions amounting to over $15,000. Not enormous compared to corporate sums I move in a week, but deliberate, small, irregular amounts meant to avoid alarms. The money flowed into accounts I didn't recognize. There was a pattern, a subtle choreography, and everything pointed not to a stranger in the night, but to someone close. Marcus's sudden resignation, his insistence on consolidation, the messages and phone calls, it all painted a cold, methodical picture. I needed help, not the kind friends offer over wine, but someone whose work is tracing money the way a tracker follows a scent. I found Rowan Hayes, a private investigator who used to consult with federal units on asset tracing. She was sharp, practical, and had the look of someone who'd spent years reading through people's lies like punctured paper. Rowan listened without blinking as I laid out the facts, the withdrawals, the anonymous text, the sudden interest in consolidating assets. When I finished, she closed her notebook and said slowly, "A plan like this always leaves a trail. We'll follow it." 2 weeks later, Rowan handed me a folder that made my stomach drop. Marcus Collins is listed as the owner of a Nevada shell company. She said, "It's a shell, no real operations, just a conduit to move money. The funds are being routed to an account in the name of Nora Price." Nora, the name from the message that morning. My throat tightened. Who was Nora? An accomplice? A pawn? A frightened woman braver than I realized? Rowan set up a secure line and introduced me to Nora. Her voice on the call trembled like thin glass. "You finally called," she said. "I thought you never would." Nora had been Marcus's assistant for nearly 3 years, she told me. At first, Marcus had been generous and charming. Later, he became cold. He'd asked Nora to open accounts in her name for convenience. When Nora grew suspicious and questioned the arrangement, Marcus turned threatening. She left, but kept evidence, a recording. She sent me the file to an encrypted mailbox Rowan prepared. The recording was worse than what I'd braced for. Marcus's voice, that voice that once hummed lullabies, negotiated over someone named Victor Hale. "Once she signs, everything's legal in my hands," he said, smooth as glass. 3 months later, I file for divorce. Reputation ruined. Split the rest. Victor's reply was a low, skeptical question. "She won't suspect." Marcus laughed. "She always trusts me. That's her Achilles heel." I dropped the earbuds. Each word felt like a blade. The man I loved had been planning not only to steal money, but to dismantle my reputation and leave me exposed. Rowan's face was taut when she looked at me. "Now we have more than suspicion," she said. "We have a shell company, wired transfers, a recording, and soon we can have proof of bribery on camera. But this is just the beginning." I felt pain flatten into a cold, steady burn. I had spent my career scrutinizing balance sheets, forecasting risks, and protecting assets. I would use every skill I had to protect myself. The trust one created that afternoon felt like a talisman. I named it after my mother, the Evelyn Foundation, and in a matter of hours shifted my shares, savings, and even the title to our downtown penthouse into the trust with Rowan's legal counsel overseeing the transfer. Legally, Marcus could not touch those assets. On paper, I had become untouchable, but the legal wall was only defense. To win, I had to bait Marcus into exposing himself. Rowan posed as an international broker and offered Marcus a lucrative-sounding land development in Nevada. He bit. He asked to bring a partner to the pitch, a man Rowan suspected was Victor Hale. Hidden cameras and mics went in. Everything was set. The first footage arrived, Marcus in a sharp suit, beaming confidence, Victor at his side, nodding. Rowan, in her broker persona, outlined a private fee to expedite permits. Victor asked, "How much?" Rowan said, low and professional, $100,000 up front. Marcus glanced at Victor and replied, "No problem. We can swing that." It was on tape. They celebrated afterward at a dimly lit restaurant. Rowan sent me photos of Marcus and Victor toasting, laughing like conspirators. In one, Marcus leaned back and spoke loud enough the next table could hear. "When Ava signs, everything's mine." Then we expand. Victor chuckled. "Bold men are the ones I admire." My stomach turned to ice and then to fire. The man who'd said for better or worse now plotted my ruin as if it were a business strategy. Rowan's voice over the phone was steady. "We have everything. Shell company, transfers, recordings, bribery on video. Marcus has signed his own sentence." For the first time in months, I felt control. The next part would be mine to write. Before I moved, I made one last domestic gesture, a performance to keep Marcus comfortable and unaware. He came home tired, dropped into his chair, and pushed a packet across the table with a tremor in his hand. "I'm not feeling well," he said. "Maybe we should plan for the future. For your sake." The packet was labeled Marital Protection Agreement. I smiled and said, "Okay, but later. I want time to review." He agreed, relief softening his features. Over the weekend, I prepared my own package, bank statements, photos, the trail Rowan had uncovered. When he opened it at dinner, his face went white. His hands shook. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I leaned back and let the silence answer for me. I set the packet down and watched the color drain from Marcus's face. He tried to force a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must have mixed up accounts," he muttered, reaching for the stack as if plucking a napkin from the table would erase the evidence. I folded my arms and let him fumble. "No," I said, "I didn't mix anything up. I followed the trail." There was a long, heavy pause, the sort that rearranges rooms and relationships. He swallowed and then, with a practiced lightness, tried to steer us back to safety. "This looks bad, but we can handle it privately. There's no need to make scenes. If we talk, resolve it, we'll be fine." His voice was oil over glass. I saw now that he believed every word he spoke could reroute reality if he only said it convincingly enough. By Monday, our small war had moved from the private to the professional. Rowan had already coordinated with a criminal attorney who specialized in financial crimes and with an investigator from the county prosecutor's office. She'd shown them the video from the broker meeting and the restaurant pictures. The legal team's eyes did the thing trained lawyers' eyes do. They measured risk and then began assembling the papers that would tilt the scales. I signed documents I barely read, trusting Rowan and the prosecutor to do what I could not do publicly. The trust protected my assets, but it didn't stop me from wanting Marcus to pay more than money. I wanted him exposed for the calculated predator he'd become. Marcus, for his part, reacted like a man who had always assumed he could control outcomes. He booked the firm's best divorce lawyer, the kind of expensive, polished counsel that advertises in magazines and owns the rooms they enter. The lawyer sent a letter the next day, a bland, threatening demand for us to meet to resolve marital arrangements, and a veiled note about repercussions should I proceed with what they described as defamatory accusations. Marcus tried to turn the narrative on me, to make me seem unstable, vindictive, the type people would pity, not prosecute. I expected this. I had already built our legal armor. The trust shielded the assets. Rowan had lined up forensic accountants to trace and freeze suspicious transfers, and Nora had agreed to go public as a cooperating witness if necessary. Marcus's lawyer sent threats. I sent silence. Behind the scenes, Marcus grew more desperate. He started leaving the house with the kind of furtive energy I'd once found attractive in a man chasing a dream, not in a man running from consequences. He began to make mistakes. He assumed a need could justify any shortcut. Once, in trying to move a chunk of unexpected cash through the shell company, he used his office laptop instead of a burner. Rowan's investigator watched the network logs and discovered the transfer attempt within minutes. Another time he arranged a meeting with Victor in a hotel suite and didn't realize the hotel's valet kept receipts tied to license plates, receipts Rowan used to place Victor and Marcus in the same place at the same time on several dates. Those missteps turned into a net. The prosecutor's office, which had been cautious, suddenly had the kind of corroborating threads they need to get search warrants and to recommend arrests. They wanted incontrovertible proof of intent and pattern. The recorded bribe pitch and the bank trails gave them the pattern. Victor's role tied the criminal intent together. Marcus's communications, once subpoenaed, filled in the intent. Evidence stacked like invoices. And in meetings where I'd once been the woman listening politely at dinner parties, I was now the one giving witness statements, the one signing subpoenas, the one answering questions with the calm precision of someone who makes numbers behave. Marcus tried to fight fire with public relations. He went on a few carefully staged calls with mutual friends, texting messages that painted me as hysterical, unstable, overly controlling. The classic script men try when they're cornered. I watched his social games like a child watching a magician. I was thankful I'd always kept my professional persona beyond reproach. My colleagues believed me when I said I had a personal matter to handle and respected the line between professional and private. I continued to go to the office because absence looks like guilt. I sat in boardrooms and negotiated budgets with the same detachment I used to balance corporate mergers. The only difference now was the undercurrent, the knowledge that this man who sat at my table at night was trying to dismantle me by daylight. Rowan and Nora were my closest allies. Nora, who had trembled at the first call, grew steadier with each small victory. She sat with me in interviews, her hands folded, showing the kind of quiet courage people undervalue until it's all that's left between you and ruin. She provided the incriminating emails Marcus had thought deleted, the notes he'd dictated in a voice memo that betrayed his plans, and the names of accountants who'd aided the shell company. Watching Nora face the prosecutor, tell her story in plain sentences, I felt an unexpected gratitude for the strange alchemy of survival, who we become when the people we trusted show their teeth. The day the warrants were served, it felt surreal. Agents arrived at Marcus's office, not in the dramatic raid scenes you see on television, but with the steady, bureaucratic inevitability of men in suits serving the law. They took corporate files and laptops, catalog devices, and left little slips of paper like small verdicts pinned to the places Marcus had hidden his plans. He called me that night, voice low, "This is temporary. This will blow over." I listened and felt no collapse. There was an odd, fierce serenity in knowing that the truth was being turned into something official, something undeniable. He tried one last gambit. Marcus invited me out under the pretense of one last conversation to clear the air. He planned to charm, to manipulate my empathy into signing something that would tie up loose ends in his favor. I met him in the foyer, where the city lights fell in long stripes over the marble. He wore a coat that made him look smaller and older than he had the week before. He took my hands, and his thumb brushed mine like a man apologizing without saying the word. "Ava," he said, soft and dangerous. "We can do this quietly. I'll sign a release. I'll step away. No headlines. No lawyers. Just us. The old scripts. The old promises. I had rehearsed this moment. Never in the rehearsal had I lost the thread. Marcus, I said, steady, I know the truth now. We can choose to resolve things privately, but the law's involved because of what you did. You put me in harm's way. You planned to take not only our money, but my reputation. I won't sign away the right to justice. He tried to argue. He tried to humiliate. He accused me of betrayal. I let each insult slide through me like rain. I had a file of facts and a future already ordered by the trust. None of his words could turn back the clock. One late evening, after Marcus had stormed out, Rowan sent a message. Victor had been observed meeting with another man who was on the prosecutor's watch list. The network of players had widened. This was good news. In the way that tends to predatory people, their arrogance leads them to add more hands to the pot, and more hands mean more fingerprints. We watched and waited. The prosecutor's office coordinated simultaneous actions. The next phase would be surgical. The recordings would be played. The bank transfers would be traced to their final destinations. Marcus's lawyers would shuffle and stall, and the media would hum with speculation. I braced for that noise, knowing how easy it is for truth to drown in chatter. But Marcus had one move I hadn't predicted. In a tone that still shocks me when I remember it, he reached for leverage I didn't know he'd been cultivating, lies about my professional conduct. He'd seeded rumors in places he thought I wouldn't hear, hints about financial mismanagement at work, whispers meant to erode the support I'd built over years. It was a reminder that even when you have the documents, human frailty is messy. People can be swayed by repetition and cruelty. I told myself I had prepared for everything, but I hadn't prepared for the particular cruelty of a man trying to erase your life by dismantling the trust others had in you. I felt my hands tighten around reality, like someone gripping the edge of a cliff. In the coming days, I would have to fight not just to convict, to freeze, and to expose. I would have to hold the trust people had placed in me. Rowan promised she'd help. Nora promised she'd testify. The prosecutor promised she'd move swiftly. Still, there was a line I could not cross alone. Marcus had put more than money on the table. He'd placed a wild card in motion. As the cameras started to circle, and my inbox filled with oblique messages from people who had been friends, I realized the last act would require something I'd kept in reserve, an unexpected truth that would shatter the illusion Marcus had built for himself and for the world. I won't reveal all of it now. Not yet. This is where the story pauses. There's one more move, one final exposure, and one reckoning Marcus never imagined. When we pick up the next part, I'll take you to the moment everything finally unravels, the evidence that makes lawyers flinch, the courtroom doors that swing open, and the confession that leaves him with nothing. But for now, I locked the trust, fed the evidence to the right people, and prepared to watch a life of lies burn under the harsh light of truth. The next days were a blur of appointments, statements, and the small, grinding bureaucracies that make public justice feel like a machine rather than the moral moment we imagine in novels. Rowan and the prosecutor coordinated carefully simultaneous subpoenas, freezes on suspect accounts, warrants on the shell company's registered address. The prosecutor moved with a cold, efficient patience I admired. Once the legal engine has teeth, it chews through pretense quickly. When the warrants were executed at Victor Hale's home and at a consulting office where Marcus had the shell company listed, the investigators found ledgers, emails, and a handful of physical records Marcus had convinced himself to keep just in case. The kind of arrogance that insists on a paper trail because one believes the law will bend rather than break. Those records were nothing short of a confession. Drafts of divorce strategies, lists of payments, notes on media contacts, and a spreadsheet labeled Phase 2 that laid out the timeline Marcus had planned to follow to wrest control of the narrative and our assets. In court, when the prosecutor played the recording Marcus had made with Victor, something peculiar happened. Marcus's famous composure cracked on screen. He had always been the actor who could make a room forget itself. On playback, he looked small and petty, a man whose ambition had been stripped down to humiliation and greed. Victor's voice, gruffer, flatter, more cynical, left an imprint too, a reminder that predators often surround themselves with predators, and the company you keep will ultimately testify to who you are. Marcus tried to litigate in the press. He hired the expensive PR firm that paints headlines with soft pastels and polite euphemisms. He tried to call in favors. He threw money at people who might be witnesses. But what money buys is a temporary gloss, not credibility. My colleagues stood by me in ways that surprised me. They had seen me for years, the late nights, the decisions made on principle, the consistency of performance, and they were not about to let a smear rewrite a decade of work. Nora, too, testified in a way that was raw and impossibly brave. She described how Marcus manipulated her, then used her name on shell accounts, how he had threatened her when she pressed back. Her testimony carried a moral clarity that startled the courtroom into silence. There was no theater in her words, only fact.